Hey folks, your OS Reviews. You're watching our retro review of the PalmPilot Professional, a personal digital assistant, or a PDA that came out in 1997. So it's almost 20 years old, and it's an updated version of the Pilot 5000 with a monochrome display, a whopping 1 megabyte of built-in RAM, along with a Motorola Dragon Ball processor clocked at 16 megahertz. So these are not specs that are going to win any awards, of course, today, but it was sufficient for the very light Palm OS version 2.0 that was built on in. And 2.0 is actually the earliest version of Palm OS that I've gotten hands-on with so far, and there are a few differences in the software that I'm going to point out in a moment. But first, let's take a closer look at the hardware. The screen has a resolution of 160 by 160. Again, it is black and white, and there is a backlight function that turns on this green glow, which isn't super attractive, but it works. And in terms of battery, it takes two AAA batteries on the back. This is actually pretty good because 20 years later, if it was using a rechargeable pack, obviously the battery would be dead by now, but I can still swap in a new pack and it will work. Battery life will last about 30 hours before you need to change the batteries again. Weight is roughly 6 ounces, so it's decent. It's a little bit chubby. It feels almost like a phablet here in 2017, but the size isn't that bad. It slips into pockets and into backpacks without too many issues. The plastic being used on here, though, definitely feels a little bit cheap, but it's all right. It's definitely an industrial design and look. And on the back, there's access to some quick shortcuts and graffiti instructions. So if you guys don't know, graffiti is the handwriting recognition program built onto all Palm PDAs. This allows you to quickly scribble out the gestures or the main parts of letters, and it will recognize that as you enter your text. There's also a built-in QWERTY keyboard, but it's a little smaller, and I think that handwriting recognition was more of a nice selling point and easier to use. The back also features a reset pin. You can see that this one was made in USA along with 3Com, and there's also kind of a connector port, which is proprietary, to sync up your data with a Mac or a PC. That was pretty new at the time. So you could sync your emails and other contact info. The side here features access to the power switch. There's also shortcuts for things like the calendar, the address book. There's also a shortcut to-do list and also a memo pad. And these two keys are for scrolling up and down if you didn't want to use the touchscreen display. The sides featured access to the Stylus, which is made out of plastic, but has a fairly comfortable size. And again, the screen itself uses resistive technology, which requires physical pressure to actually register a tap or a click. So turning things on, we can see that it looks a little bit dim, but there's actually a little contrast wheel on the side that you can use to adjust if you want to make it darker or even brighter. So let's get it to an ideal place. And it is a kind of reflective and shiny screen, so it's a little bit tough to see. However, in person, it does tend to work a little better. There's also access to additional shortcuts that takes you into other menus, such as a calculator and also a universal search icon, which is actually a pretty nifty feature to have. And you can search through all your apps, all your notes, all your different stuff stored on this PDA all at once. And there's this little box here for entering the handwriting recognition. The one on the left is for letters, so things like A, for instance, whereas these are for numbers. So I can tap on 1 all the way to 9, and that's going to be recognized. So it's divided here for easier accessibility, and I can tap on this little dot here to access the full QWERTY keyboard. And again, you can see how small that is by today's standards. It definitely wasn't designed for just finger tapping, really meant just for use with a stylus, but it was all right and fairly sensitive. And there's also a kind of a beep speaker on here that makes a noise whenever you tap on something for physical confirmation. There's also numbers, so I can tap on that for symbols, and also an international version of that keyboard. I can tap on this one as well just to bring up the letters, and then tapping on it once more will kind of erase it and make it disappear again. The backlight can be accessed by tapping on this key for about 3 seconds, and it turns on, but it's not super bright. However, it casts a fairly even blue glow, and if you were completely in the dark, such as checking your contacts or emails, stuff like that at night, you didn't want to disturb others, it was a nice feature, even though it drained the battery a lot faster. So make sure that you turn it off when you're done. And you can still kind of notice it here. If I tap on it again and turn it off, you can see the difference between the two. A nice thing of having a traditional kind of black and white screen, though, is that even if there's some background light, it still remains decently visible. And again, the contrast can be changed if you want it darker or lighter. You can see that the calculator app is one of the programs pre-installed as a utility that they also took advantage of larger keys. This was a fairly almost a futuristic app in my opinion, just because the keys were so large and a lot more similar to what we expect on touchscreen devices today. But if you look at the other apps installed on here, they're a lot smaller and more similar to what you have on a PC with icons and whatnot that aren't as finger friendly. But this was, again, one of the few apps built right on in that were easy to tap on with just your flesh without the use of a stylus per se. So let's go back home and take a look at some other things. One thing I noticed immediately when I took a closer look at this Palm OS version 2.0 was the bottom, this little bar here. This is not something that you see in newer versions of Palm OS, and I was surprised by this, but there is a battery status icon that will consistently show how much battery life is remaining along with the time and date information, and this will always be there. There's no way to hide this bar, unfortunately, but you can see how in newer Palm OSs you may have this bar moved to the top and it won't show these two things either. It's mostly going to show an icon that you can tap on to give you more shortcut options for settings and whatnot. So there's definitely been some tweaks in terms of the software since Palm OS 2.0 and 1.0 to what we have in newer PDA versions like the Tungsten TX, for instance. So other basic utility apps haven't really been tweaked on here, and they're pretty standard. There's access to the address book that you can tap on. There's a PalmPilot Accessories US Robotics number that you can contact for emergencies or for updates, software, stuff like that. I can scroll up and down between these messages, and it does work. And for instance, you can tap on the phone number even, and that will allow you to edit it. Then there's the expense kind of checklist that enables me to add a running account of how much I'm spending, maybe on vacation or something like that. So I can add an expense type and categorize this. So for instance, I can make it under a certain city or add my own categories and then of course enter the number. Going back home again, there is the HotSync function, so that is the syncing with the computer. When you dock it into its proprietary little connector, you would tap on the key once to start the syncing process. There's also, again, the mail, which requires syncing for you to access your latest mail, but here's a sample from US Robotics that says, "Welcome to PalmPilot Mail. In order for your desktop email messages to appear here, you must configure HotSync on your desktop as follows." And then there's this super complicated procedure that is not very user-friendly by 2017 standards, but you can see that it does work, and you need to activate the software, install the software, and then sync it to have access to your things. And then you can just read, reply, forward, delete, create changes on your PDA. The next time that you dock it and sync it, everything gets uploaded to the web. So actually a pretty interesting tool that works kind of well for a device without built-in wireless options. So here's a Memo Pad. What's interesting about the Memo Pad is there isn't a way to actually doodle or draw. You can only create physical notes that are typed. So for instance, I can tap on New, and then here again, I can tap on the on-screen keyboard, or I can use graffiti, of course, to peck out something that I want. And it's okay if you want to make a few quick messages. In terms of memory, let's take a look. And you can see it's categorized by each of the individual apps. Back home once more. And now we have just security, which is really your settings. You can create a password, so whenever you turn the display on, you have to enter it before going into a certain app, stuff like that. And also a to-do list, which is pretty simple. You can check it off after you're done with a certain task, so that's a nice little software trick that you could access. So essentially that was it as far as the main features on here. What was nice, of course, with Palm PDAs and Palm OS in general was that for its time, it was one of the most heavily used mobile OSs, so there was tons of available software if you wanted to download some stuff online, including games, emulators, stuff that originally ran on, let's say, a Game Boy, were ported onto this. There were, of course, also programs and utility apps, stuff like business calculators, content created by third-party users that could be downloaded, some which cost money, others which were free, that extended the usage of this and made it customizable to each industry and to each individual, which was what made this so powerful. And again, apps really is the heart and core of any smart assistant, whether it's a PDA or a smartphone today. And for its time, it had a huge catalog. Although looking back, it wasn't as easy to access as we have today, since it's built right on into our phones. With this, you had to have a separate computer, download it, and then sync it up into its memory to access those functions. But again, it was expandable. So anyways, guys, that was an interesting retro look back or a throwback review of the PalmPilot Professional. This was a relatively memorable and iconic PDA because it chronicles almost the start of their history and their story, and of course how much they've changed through the years to what we see as the modern Palm OS, later purchased by HP and now acquired by LG, with devices like the HP touchpad, the Palm Pre series, a lot more sleek, a lot more elegant, but this was near the beginning of mobile computing history, and again, a pretty exciting device to take a look back at. Thanks for watching this video here at OS Reviews. This was the PalmPilot Professional.